Previously on the Originals, Josh was poisoned while trying to save Marcel and ultimately died during the process, reuniting with Aiden in the afterlife. Hope triggered her werewolf curse after killing an innocent human, and her condition is worsening, leading to the possibility of her death. Meanwhile, Freya, seizing the opportunity of the Michelson family's reunion, decided to hold her wedding. Freya invited Elijah to walk her down the aisle, but, surprisingly, Elijah, who had always prioritized family, declined the invitation. He had already decided to leave the family with a heavy heart. Elijah quietly packed his belongings alone, only to find a letter that Hayley had written to him 5 years ago. He didn't even dare to open the envelope. Elijah's thoughts drifted back to 5 years ago. At that time, Elijah was playing the piano in a bar in France when he unexpectedly noticed a girl who hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. Elijah took the initiative to strike up a conversation with the girl, asking if something was bothering her.
Do you ever have an ex you just can't seem to get out of your system?
With his memory completely lost, Elijah couldn't answer. Instead, he offered the girl a drink. They exchanged names. Elijah stammers in a rare way. Hayley's gaze was incredibly gentle and full of affection. They chatted aimlessly, as if they were meeting for the first time. Elijah asked Hayley which places in France she had visited. Hayley replied that this bar was her first stop after getting off the plane, and aside from the hotel doorman, Elijah was the first person she'd spoken to. They exchanged jokes about the doorman's habit of flirting with everyone.
He's not shy.
Not shy.
For the first time, Hayley smiled, but then Elijah glanced at the clock and mentioned that he had promised his girlfriend to go see an art exhibit. He tried to invite Hayley to join him, but after much hesitation, she declined, unwilling to give up. Elijah told Hayley the location of the exhibit, saying she was welcome to come by if she wanted a change of scenery. As Elijah was standing alone, lost in thought while staring at the art exhibit, Hayley showed up beside him. She couldn't help but mock the exhibit, saying it was absolutely dreadful. Elijah explained that it was a type of culture. Hayley scoffed, saying, "This can hardly be called culture. After all, having a 1,000-year-old master painter at home." Hayley couldn't muster any interest in the exhibit, but Elijah suggested that maybe if she drank more, the paintings might start to look better. They lightly clinked their glasses and, setting aside their identities as a vampire and a werewolf hybrid, they talked like two young people who had met by chance, discussing wine, art, childhood, and life. This was Hayley's first time in France, and she mentioned that the place where she grew up wasn't nearly as glamorous.
Bienvenue.
Can I ask you a question?
It's love at first sight.
Elijah was actually talking about Hayley, but Hayley thought Elijah had fallen in love with the city at first sight. A pair of elderly dancers caught Hayley's attention. She said that she longed for a love that could last so long, but Elijah told her that the elderly couple had only married a year ago. They were late-life lovers. He said that maybe some things can't be measured by time.
You ever feel like that?
Like what?
Like you were just destined for someone?
In truth, Elijah was talking about his feelings for Hayley. Even though Elijah had forgotten all of his past, he still fell in love with the girl standing before him at first sight. But given that Hayley had a past love she couldn't forget and he had a girlfriend he'd been with for years, Elijah couldn't fully embrace this newfound attraction. He could only ask Hayley for one dance. They took each other's hands and moved to the center of the dance floor, swaying to the gentle music. As their bodies drew closer, the atmosphere between them grew increasingly intimate. Just as Elijah was about to give in to the urge to kiss Hayley, he restrained his desire. They stopped dancing, and the moment turned slightly awkward. In this life, their love could only end here. Hayley said that if they met again in another life,
I'll be waiting for another dance.
she gently kissed Elijah on the cheek, bidding farewell to the man she could never forget. When the memory faded, Elijah finally understood how deep Hayley's love for him had been. She had even bought a villa for them, hoping that one day they could still wake up beside each other, filled with love. As Elijah picked up his suitcase, determined to leave the city, Klaus called out to him.
I knew who she was, Klaus.
When Elijah burst into the house where Hayley was being held, he recognized at once the girl he had danced with all those years ago, but he mistakenly believed that Hayley was part of an enemy's scheme, and so he didn't reach out to save her.
I could have saved her. I could have saved her, Klaus. I can't forgive myself.
Elijah turned to leave again. Klaus, however, told him that hope was about to die. He can't even talk about it. He can't ruin his sister's wedding. Klaus and his brother walked their newlywed sister down the red carpet. Freya held her brother's hands as they slowly walked across the flower-covered lawn. She looked blissfully at her bride waiting in the distance. Keelan held a bouquet, her eyes filled with tenderness. Their family watched the scene with hearts full of emotion. Cole, serving as the temporary officiant, delivered a blessing. Watching the happy couple, Elijah couldn't help but be flooded with emotions. Elijah finally mustered the courage to open the letter Hayley had written to him. He imagined Hayley writing to him in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. Hayley wrote that although she could never fully forget Elijah, she was grateful for that trip to France. Seeing Elijah find happiness with her own eyes had allowed her to move on and let go of the past. She wished that if they ever met again in another time and place, they could finish the dance they'd left incomplete. The couple exchanged rings, and the wedding ceremony concluded in the gentle warmth of the breeze. Cole loudly announced that the couple was now married. Keelan and Freya kissed and embraced. The guests burst into applause. Hope cast a spell on the flowers overhead, causing the white petals to rise into the air. The joyous atmosphere lingered until nightfall. Cole and Davina danced hand in hand. Hope and Keelan swayed to the rhythm of the music. Elijah quietly sipped his champagne. Rebecca and Marcel, the 1,000-year-old star-crossed lovers, finally had a chance to talk. Marcel said that things would never truly end between them. Rebecca smiled knowingly. Klaus can't be bothered to enjoy himself as he watches his daughter without blinking for fear that she might be in some kind of discomfort. But Hope suddenly collapsed into Keelan's arms. Klaus rushed forward. The older family members quickly sounded the alarm, but Hope was simply drunk. Nothing more. She raised her champagne glass and said she was happy, though she couldn't enjoy 1,000 years of moments like this, as her elders could. Hope's somewhat bittersweet words cast a shadow of sadness over everyone. They all realized that maybe Hope wouldn't survive her first transformation, and that over 200 bones in her body would break together. It would be both a punishment for her deadly mistake and a difficult rebirth. A week quickly passed, and Elijah asked Marcel if the witches had made any real progress. Marcel said that despite Davina and Freya poring over countless spell books, they hadn't found a cure for Hope. Despite everyone's reluctance, there is no cure for Hope's venom, and the black veins have spread all over Hope's body. Klaus couldn't bring himself to tell his daughter the truth that she was going to die. Klaus gazed at his sleeping daughter, overwhelmed with emotion, as if he had made a difficult decision. He quickly rose and left, asking his brother to join him in taking Hope away. They were going back to the Salvatore school in Mystic Falls. Klaus was certain that the school would have a way to handle the werewolf students' transformations, but Elijah said he should find someone Hope didn't dislike as much to do it.
You're the only one I trust.
A boy recited an incantation over a skull while a girl made a magic orb float in the air. This was the Salvatore School of Magic, co-founded by Caroline and Alaric. Caroline was introducing the school's unique features to the students' parents when she looked up and saw Klaus leaning against the doorframe, smiling at her, but Klaus had a different purpose for his visit. Hope wouldn't survive past the full moon tonight, and he needed the twin witches of the Gemini Coven to siphon the dark magic from Hope's body. Caroline didn't want her daughters involved. She explained that removing the dark magic was easy, but the demon wouldn't just stay trapped in a jar and sit quietly on a shelf. Klaus, however, suggested putting the dark magic into himself. Once, Caroline had said she'd seal Klaus in cement and throw him into the deepest part of the ocean. Klaus swore he wouldn't put Caroline's daughters in danger, and Caroline was convinced. Caroline then talked to her daughters to get them on board. Her rebellious daughters, though, seriously started bargaining with Caroline, asking for new phones, freedom from dress code restrictions, and permission to go to a dance. After much effort, Caroline finally reached an agreement with her daughters. Klaus expressed his deep gratitude to the girls, but Alaric drove a stake into Klaus's chest. Refusing to make any deal with the demon, Caroline angrily confiscated Alaric's weapon. Alaric insisted that everything he did was for the safety of the school. He sharply pointed out that the ocean wouldn't hold Klaus, and that they were effectively giving wings to a tiger. Klaus, holding the blood-stained stake, appeared before them. He admitted that Alaric's concerns were valid, but he had already thought of a solution. Klaus pulled up the last remaining white oak stake in the world. He said that once the dark magic entered his body, he would sacrifice himself without hesitation. Klaus's selfless decision left Caroline heartbroken. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Klaus. Elijah is now counseling Hope about Klaus' experiences as a young boy learning to draw on his own. A boy brought Hope a milkshake, inviting her to join him at tonight's music festival. But Hope, worried about her first transformation, turned him down. Elijah told her that the full moon wouldn't rise until late, and she had time to go on a date, but Hope replied that she was going to die. A few bullies were picking on Landon, deliberately refusing to pay him. Landon was furious but helpless. Elijah placed a few bills on the table and asked Hope if she knew how to drive, saying he was going to get her a luxury car to try out. They drove the luxury car down the street, only to spot the bullies causing trouble again. Elijah noted that Landon didn't want to lose his job, so he couldn't fight back, but he and Hope had nothing to lose. Suddenly filled with a sense of justice, Hope ignored Elijah's warnings and used her magic. Connor's car began to freeze over. With a wave of Hope's hand, the windows of Connor's car suddenly shattered. Connor looked on in fury, but there was nothing he could do. The act lifted Hope's spirits considerably. Elijah, however, remarked that if her father found out he'd let her do this, he'd definitely kill him. But at that moment, Hope's face turned pale, and she said she wanted to go back to school to rest for a while. Elijah urged Hope not to lose her fighting spirit. Hope, though, blamed herself entirely for her mother's death. Overcome with emotion, Hope suddenly clutched her head in pain and collapsed into Elijah's arms. Klaus and Elijah were filled with panic. Hope had suddenly fallen unconscious. Her heart had stopped beating. She awoke in the dim world of the afterlife, surrounded by silence. But Hope's arrival shocked Hayley. Mother and daughter were reunited in the other world. Hayley held her daughter tightly, unable to understand why her daughter had died so young. Hope, however, said that she had accepted her fate and just wanted to be with her mother. In the real world, Klaus was losing his composure. He ordered his brother to find Caroline and her daughters. Elijah hurried away. Hope also heard her father's voice calling out to her. She quickly apologized to her mother, saying she couldn't forgive herself. But Hayley told her that she had already forgiven her and did her best to soothe her daughter's emotions. Hope said she didn't want her mother to be alone here. Hayley assured Hope that she wasn't alone, and took her to the bayou, where the werewolf tribe once lived. There, Hayley's parents were living, along with her werewolf kin. Jackson was strumming his guitar by the campfire. Everything felt warm and beautiful. Hayley said that she had found peace, and that Hope needed to go back and fully experience a different life. At the very least, she needed to experience one unforgettable love. Hayley said she would be waiting to hear her daughter share her stories. Hayley then asked Hope to do one thing for her. Meanwhile, Klaus was desperately performing CPR on his daughter. Hope finally awoke, and Klaus breathed a sigh of relief. His hands trembled as he pulled his daughter into a tight embrace. The overwhelming joy of having her back brought tears streaming down Klaus's face. Hope told Klaus that she didn't want to die. Klaus hurried to comfort his daughter, saying he had already found a way to save her. Night had fallen, and father and daughter strolled slowly through the bustling streets. The twin witches would siphon the dark magic from Hope, but Klaus hadn't mentioned that he would absorb the dark magic into his own body. Hope believed her father's reassurance. She then spotted Elijah sitting alone on a bench and said she wanted to spend some time with her uncle. Hope, holding an ice cream, walked over to Elijah. She seemed to have forgiven him for not saving her mother. Elijah confessed that he once saw Hope as the savior of the entire family, but now he realized it was unfair to place such a heavy burden on a little girl. Hope, however, said that maybe she, like Elijah, was born to bear the weight of the family. Hope said that when she was unconscious, she saw her mother, and her mom asked her to deliver a message to Elijah.
She told me to tell you that she's still holding out for that dance.
Elijah fell silent, knowing that Hayley was still waiting for him on the other side of death. Elijah's heart grew heavier. Landon, who had asked Hope out earlier in the day, was still waiting on the street. Elijah reminded her to seize her happiness, then walked away. Hope approached Landon from behind. Seeing Hope appear, Landon was surprised. He told her that the car of the bullies who had harassed him earlier had exploded, and now that she had accepted his invitation, maybe today was his lucky day. Hope told him she couldn't stay long, but they might still have time for a dance. Landon offered his hand, and they danced together to the gentle music. Klaus watched silently from a distance. Caroline approached Klaus and began to talk about her feelings for him.
You weren't there, but the point is, I think a part of me has always known that you weren't the villain of my story.
Hearing this long overdue confession, Klaus was deeply moved. He took the initiative and moved closer to Caroline, silently feeling the momentary bliss of a shared heart. But the sudden toll of the midnight bell shattered the tender atmosphere between them. The time for Hope's transformation had come. Klaus asked Caroline to go ahead, saying he wanted to let his daughter dance for just 5 more minutes. Caroline obediently turned to leave, but not before casting one last glance at Klaus's back. Her eyes filled with sorrow. Klaus chained his daughter to prevent her from causing harm after she transformed. He turned to retrieve the potion, only to find Elijah standing in the hallway. Elijah had already learned of Klaus's decision to sacrifice himself and refused to let his brother die alone. Elijah insisted that Hope still needed her father and offered to die in Klaus's place. But Klaus wouldn't allow his brother to sacrifice his life for him. The two of them began to fight without a word. Klaus knocked Elijah to the ground and picked up the white oak stake. In the silent forest, under the bright full moon, Hope drank the potion, and her first werewolf transformation began. Klaus watched his daughter with concern. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Caroline's twin witches were already preparing the ritual circle. Klaus explained the transformation process to Hope, telling her that her mother wanted her to run freely in the forest. Every bone in Hope's body was breaking, and her eyes turned golden. The transformation continued as her limbs began to contort. Under the twin witches' spell, a blue light slowly rose from Hope's spine, gradually gathering in the center of the ritual circle. The transformation was complete, and a beautiful young she-wolf stood before Klaus. Klaus looked at his bloodline with pride. Hope turned and began to run into the forest, reveling in the thrill of being a wolf. After watching his daughter leave, Klaus hurried away, heading to the ritual circle to ask Alaric where Caroline had gone. Alaric explained that Caroline couldn't bear to watch Klaus die, so she went into the forest to help Hope. Klaus stepped into the ritual circle, standing between the two girls as the blue light suddenly shot into his chest. Elijah arrived in a rush, but it was too late. He could only watch helplessly as his brother absorbed the dark magic. The spell ended, and Klaus collapsed to the ground. Alaric quickly took his daughters and left the scene. Klaus came to his senses and, without hesitation, pulled out the white oak stake. Ignoring Elijah's pleas, he attempted to drive the stake into his heart. But Hope, having finished her transformation, suddenly appeared behind her father. She realized too late that the dark magic had been transferred into her father's body. She refused to let her father sacrifice his life to save hers. She wouldn't allow Klaus to end things this way, but Klaus was resolute, leaving Hope with no choice but to use magic to knock her father to the ground. Black veins had already spread across Klaus's wrists. It seemed like the cycle was beginning again. The Hollow's power continued to influence Klaus. Hope and Freya began frantically searching through spell books, trying to find a way to save him, but it was all in vain. The dark magic was affecting Klaus far more than it had affected Hope. Freya, with tears in her eyes, could only urge Hope to accept the inevitable. Klaus awoke from his unconscious state. Freya had transferred a small portion of the dark magic from Klaus into Elijah, allowing Klaus to stay conscious. Elijah had confiscated the white oak stake. He told Klaus that if his death was inevitable, he should take the time to properly say goodbye to his family, especially to Hope. But Klaus refused without hesitation. He was grateful for everything his brother had done for him over the past 1,000 years. Yet this time, Klaus chose to face death alone in his own way, rather than let the sorrow of farewell touch everyone in the family.
This last time, let me be.
Elijah couldn't deny his brother's final request. Silently, he lowered his head, his eyes red and his lips trembling. Elijah stood aside and watched as Klaus dragged his sick body away. This was the last act of indulgence an older brother could offer his younger brother. When it comes time to say goodbye to life, no one can truly face it with composure. Caroline sought Klaus out, and he thought she had come to try to stop him. But instead, Caroline played a voice memo.
Caroline, I'm standing in one of my favorite places in the world, surrounded by food, music, art, culture, and all I can think about is how much I want to show it to you.
Caroline asked Klaus to fulfill a promise he had made long ago, and Klaus agreed. They went to a bar. Klaus said that if he had a few hundred more years to live, Caroline wouldn't be here now. Caroline replied that maybe she would have let him chase her for a few more centuries. She urged Klaus to say goodbye to his daughter. If he didn't say a proper goodbye to Hope, she would never be able to move on. Klaus admitted with tears in his eyes that he didn't know how to face his daughter, openly acknowledging his own weakness. With Caroline's encouragement, a smile finally appeared on Klaus's face. In this final meeting of their lives, Caroline finally found the courage to kiss Klaus on the lips. After that sorrowful kiss, Caroline stood up and walked toward the bar's exit, without looking back, without hesitation. But both Caroline and Klaus knew that she would never forget this man. Elijah was counseling Hope, explaining that Klaus hadn't said goodbye because he was too afraid. He cared so much about Hope that he didn't know how to say farewell. But then Klaus returned to his daughter's side, saying that he wanted to spend some time alone with her. Elijah nodded in relief and turned to leave. Hope selfishly voiced the backup plan, saying that Elijah was willing to die in Klaus's place so that her father could stay with her as she grew up. But Klaus replied that no father could stand by and watch someone else sacrifice themselves for his daughter while he did nothing. He told Hope not to grieve for him, saying that exchanging his life to rid the world of dark magic was a noble act. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Marcel were reminiscing about Klaus in their own way. They had once maintained a secret relationship for a while, almost getting caught by the ever-suspicious Klaus. Elijah joins in the Klaus remembrance with his two sisters, and Elijah boasts that his brother was the first to discover Van Gogh's talent. Rebecca pointed out that Klaus had once hypnotized an entire circus to follow Elijah around. Marcel joked that Klaus, when drunk, was convinced his paintings could light up the world. Cole joined in with a bottle of fine wine, acknowledging that although Klaus had hurt him many times, his sacrifice was something to be remembered. Klaus appeared with his daughter, admitting that although he had often been a lousy brother, he truly loved his little siblings. A joyful banquet was held at the Michelson family estate. The Michelson siblings, rarely gathered together, smiled and teased each other, showing no signs of sorrow. Amid the festive atmosphere, they raised their glasses in a heartfelt farewell to Klaus. After the gathering, Marcel sat down beside Hope, telling her that while he couldn't always be with her, he would never abandon his little sister. Hope gratefully held her brother's hand. Rebecca interrupted the laughter, announcing that it was time for the bonfire wishes. The family gathered around the fire, tossing in slips of paper with their wishes written on them, but Elijah quietly folded his wish and tucked it into his pocket. Klaus then expressed his gratitude and love for his family, assuring them that the Michelson family would not fall apart because of his departure.
Always and forever.
Always and forever.
Always and
Always
forever.
and forever.
He asked to spend some time alone with Hope. As Klaus and Hope walked away, Elijah turned to the others and said that there was something he needed to discuss with them. The Michelson siblings returned to that fateful bench. Klaus apologized to Rebecca, admitting that he shouldn't have interfered with her happiness. To make up for his past recklessness, he had asked Caroline for the potion to turn into a human. Whenever Rebecca needed it, she could use the potion to become human, to enjoy the earthly happiness she had always longed for, and to have her own family and children. Rebecca, deeply moved, hugged both of her brothers in turn. She forced herself to leave, holding back her tears. Klaus said he didn't want his brother to say goodbye to him with sadness. Elijah agreed, saying he didn't want that either. He pulled out the white oak stake and broke it in half. Elijah sat down beside Klaus and finally revealed his plan.
I intend to die by your side.
Klaus objected to Elijah's crazy idea. Klaus told him that after his death, Elijah would be free. 1,000 years of redemption must eventually come to an end. Elijah can finally do what he wants to do. But Elijah said that going with Klaus to death was his wish. He had already told every member of the family about his decision and received their blessings and farewells. Elijah even looked Cole in the eye and warned him that if he didn't take care of Hope, he would come back and kill him. Hope was busy drawing a family portrait. Hayley, dressed in white, smiled as she stood behind her daughter, but Hope looks back and there's no one behind her. Vincent had returned to New Orleans and accepted Freya's offer to be the father of her and Keelan's child. Marcel was handing out plane tickets to the vampires. As they were giving New Orleans back to the humans, Rebecca asked Marcel if there was a ticket for her, but she needed to go back to Mystic Falls to retrieve the cure first. Rebecca solemnly accepted Marcel's proposal, saying that if Marcel was willing to spend a century with her, then she was willing to become his wife. Rebecca handed the envelope, symbolizing her acceptance, to Marcel. Marcel finally smiled. They embraced each other tightly and kissed. Klaus and Elijah sat by the bench, sharing the same fate of death. Just as they had shared the white oak stake, the two brothers stood up, facing each other.
I don't deserve the love you've given me, brother. But I am so grateful.
Klaus gripped his brother's shoulder. The white oak stake was pressed against both of their chests. In a moment of sorrowful and heartfelt gaze, the original brothers slowly drove the white oak stake into each other's hearts. The ashen hue gradually spread across Klaus and Elijah's faces. The evening breeze swept through. The city remained as silent as ever, and embers wrapped in ash slowly drifted up into the New Orleans sky. In the city they loved most, Elijah stood by Klaus's side, ending their eternal lives in a glorious and noble way.